was just about mentioned as modern.
Brown with a very special victory report. It's been a great day for Portsmouth Grammar School. Founded in 1732 on the 11th of February, the school is 250 years old today. Over the next 25 minutes, you'll meet masters and pupils associated with PGS for the past 60 years. The headmaster now is David Richards.
This morning, we held very special assemblies in our new hall at the grammar school. These occasions were really for the boys and the girls, and for them alone. It was the domestic celebration. We had two very special guests. One, the Lord Mayor, for he is an old boy of the school, and William Smith, about 1700, was Mayor of Portsmouth. It was he who left in his will of 1732 money for the foundation of a grammar school in Portsmouth.
And so we've gone from mayor to mayor in a span of 250 years. And
yes.
Also I think this morning you had the provost with you, and there is a historical connection there.
Yes, certainly. The provost is currently chairman of governors. Just over 100 years ago, it was Edward Grant, as vicar of Portsmouth, one of the provost's predecessors, therefore, at the cathedral, who reopened the school after a time of virtual closure.
Head of history at Portsmouth Grammar School, and also the co-author of a school history, is Ted Washington. He sees the important date in the school's development not as 1732, but as 1879.
Because it was at that time that Canon Grant, the Vicar of Portsmouth, and other associates established the present institution and had the building put up, which of course is still used by the lower school today. And they gradually got about 200 to 300 pupils in the early 1880s.
And what sort of age would those pupils stay on till?
I think to about 17 or 18 as they do today. I don't think there was much difference there.
At what stage in all of this did the Hillsey playing fields come into operation?
They came later. I can't give from memory a precise date when we first rented Hillsey, and then of course it was bought and extended in the 1920s, in the late 1920s, as a result of the organisation of Dr. Barton, the headmaster, and a rich shipowner called Heath Harrison, who gave some of money.
Hillsey was right out in the country. The end of the city house was at the green post almost. Very few houses beyond that. And for 3 halfpence from the Guildhall Square out to Hillsey, one travelled on an open-top tram, irrespective of whether it was raining or dry, and it was virtually a day's journey to reach Hillsey. And when we did get there, of course, the facilities were most primitive. It consisted of a terrible corrugated iron shed where we had to change, where I remember the groundsman used to breed dogs, and it was covered in straw, and the smell was horrific.
What about the other side of Cambridge Junction, what is now known as the big school, the middle and the upper school, the old barracks? When did that pass into the hands of the grammar school?
That passed into the hands of the grammar school in 1927, and once again this was Canon Barton, the headmaster, who was a man of great ambition and resources, and he again got a great deal of valuable assistance, particularly from Councillor Privet, who was a builder, of course, and Councillor Privet agreed to adapt this Cambridge barracks, which had been bought from the government, and he adapted it at his own expense as the main school building.
I spent the majority of my time at school in the old school, and I can remember that in I think 1926, the the other school moved into the present building, which was a complete barracks, almost unaltered, except that we had blackboards, obviously, and desks, but it was very, very primitive indeed. I can also remember the visit of the then Prince of Wales, who actually came to inspect this school, and all the boys were dressed in white flannels, which they had worn all day long. How on earth they were managed to keep a crease and keep them clean, I do not know.
In the 20th century, what have been the turning points for the school? I would imagine certainly that the Second War must have been a turning point for the school.
It certainly was, and as I read the records about the school's activities during the war, I was immensely impressed with the work of the headmaster and staff at that time. The school did pass through a real crisis. First of all, of course, it went to a building outside Winchester called Northwood Park, which proved very unsatisfactory, and then it was established in various hotels and schools in Bournemouth, and conditions were really very arduous, and one greatly respects a small group of masters who, as it were, kept the school going and managed to retain its traditions. And indeed, a great deal of credit, I think, belongs to the boys too, who kept the traditions of the old school going and produced some splendid examination results.
By the time that I got to Bournemouth, where we were evacuated, the second evacuation, the school really had been settled in for about 2 years, thanks to the work of Joe Stork, and I took over what might rudely be called a running show. But it was extremely difficult. Boys were largely billeted all over the town, living, as far as I remember, with rather daft landladies, who every morning seemed to turn them out. I suppose there was seldom a day in which I didn't have at least 4 boys to replace before nightfall. The buildings we were in were much of a shambles. They were, in fact, 2 derelict preparatory schools. One had been turned into a sort of hostel, which was well run, and the other was a derelict building with a sort of hut at the back, which became the school hall. I remember very well teaching the History 6th in a room with all the glass had gone from the windows. I mean, it didn't hurt anybody except the rain came in, but it was really down to sort of basics. And what I think is interesting about evacuation, and I believe it's been the experience of other schools, and that is that the real heart of a school, if it's sound, stands. And I think it's in some ways a strengthening experience. It's not the sort of thing you would want a school to go through, but if a school is a great school, as I believe Portsmouth Grammar School to be, then I believe you shed an awful lot of nonsense. You shed the worst traditions, you keep the best part, and you come back to Portsmouth, as we did in January 45, in a strange way, as I say, strengthened.
I came to the school in 1946, in September 1946, and I still remember how depressing the building was, but there was nothing depressing about the atmosphere of the school. Under Donald Lindsay, at that time, the school positively fizzed.
I think it's the only time in the whole of my teaching career that a school was every day better than it was the day before. After all, if you've got some tiles put on the roof, it does at least make it better. My first day as headmaster was spent in the headmaster's study, gazing at a hole in the ceiling. All I had was a couple of packing cases as a desk and something to sit on, and the snow fell quite steadily on that first day. But here was everybody excited. We were starting all over again. I mean, the place was an appalling mess. The Navy had, in fact, saved it. Technically, in the sense they caught incendiary bombs or put them out. And the structure of the building was more or less sound, but the rooms were perfectly appalling. And boys really fell to with a will and cleaned the place, and there was a general air of excitement and well-being, and gradually one got going. And to that extent, as I say, everything got better. Here were people who had come to this school sent by parents who believed passionately in the place, and you went to school because it was a place that you, first of all, you did work. It was a tradition of learning. learning, which is the old grammar school tradition of this country. And therefore what I think we were doing was to bring back something that had existed in the past. It wasn't creating something new, but it was bringing it back. And there, I think the source of the success lies entirely with the staff. The school can get on perfectly well with a dubious headmaster. What it cannot do is to get on with a bad staff. That is found out. And I was tremendously lucky, both in men that I inherited, and I suppose if I did anything for the place, I was able to bring a great number of really rather live teachers into the place.
John Range, he was absolutely brilliant in most things, but he was terribly unpunctual. And we always had a pre-term staff meeting on the afternoon before. And John would always arrive about half an hour late, making the most wildly impossible excuses, like in the beginning of the summer term, terribly sorry, headmaster, snow on the line, etc. And would then, through a crowded common room, trip over people, really creating a disruption, and then sit down. When John eventually left a few years later, at the prize giving, Donald Lindsay made some very amusing and witty references to his unpunctuality, apart from many endearing remarks. And there it seemed to rest for a few years. Meanwhile, John had gone to a couple of other schools. He was currently at Sherborne, I think, some years later. I met him at lunchtime, and we concocted a scheme, or he suggested it, that he should mistake his school and come late into the staff room meeting. So the staff room meeting eventually began, with the headmaster, unusually in very serious mood, I forget what it was about. Suddenly, about a quarter of an hour later, the door crashed open. John Range's face appeared at the door. He looked round, acting beautifully, with a look of complete astonishment on his face. He said, "Terribly sorry, headmaster, snow on the line," and then this look of astonishment. "Oh, terribly sorry, wrong school."
I think that certainly the drama under Donald Lindsay, the drama and the music were high points in the school's activity.
I'd always enjoyed the theatre and everything to do with it, and did take on, and I think probably abused my position in doing so, a great number of the productions immediately after we came back from the war. One frightful event occurred in our production of The Devil's Disciple, and because the man playing the part of Christie, or the boy rather playing the part of Christie, could not get from Petersfield owing to a blizzard. The whole of Butser area was snowbound and couldn't get through, and I had to read the part. I knew it roughly, but I had to read it and go round with a book in my hand. What time Roger Mills, now known very much as a distinguished producer, was my mother. And he adored the fact that he had to deal with his headmaster and tell his headmaster that he was a dunderhead and a blockhead that brought the house down.
Whenever any old boys of Portsmouth Grammar School during that period get together, almost surely they will mention the name of John Davison. And John Davison, who ran the music during that period, one of the most remarkable schoolmasters I have ever met. John Davison managed to cajole and coerce hundreds of initially reluctant boys so that they really eventually got thoroughly involved in Messiah, in the Mass in B minor, in the Brahms Requiem, and hundreds of boys pay their tribute to John Davison for interesting them in good music of that kind.
Dear old Eric Sutton, who was in fact John Davison's number 2 in the music department of the school at the time, a short-sighted man, extremely so. I personally have seen him in the days when the roundabout outside the school at Cambridge Junction was indeed a roundabout instead of the crossroads. I have in fact seen him cycling round that in an anti-clockwise direction, which was of course amusing in itself. But my main recollection of him was on one particular Tuesday assembly. He always used to play the same piece of music, always used to play a pizzicato, possibly with respect because he perhaps couldn't tell the difference because of his sight between an organ and a piano, but it was always pizzicato. And this particular Tuesday he came in with his piece of music, the first dozen bars or so of it, which at least he knew off by heart, and he put his music on the stand, started in his usual inevitable way, got to as far as he remembered of it, looked at his music, furtively looked round, and turned his music the other way up.
Roger Wilkins with memories of assembly in the 60s. And at that point, we'll take a break.
Gardening enthusiasts, Inksters of Bedhampton can sell you a complete garden shed, including floor, for just £60 plus VAT. Inksters, open 6 days a week from 8 till 6, behind the Haven Hypermarket.
Welcome back to part 2 of Victoria Report, which on this, the 250th anniversary of the founding of Portsmouth Grammar School, examines the school, its history, and its success. We're almost up to date. Up to the point, in fact, when the school ceased to become direct grant. Here's Tony Snelling.
I was very sorry to see the direct grant scheme go. That was one of the reasons why I and many others at about the same time, like me, I think, came into this sort of school. My previous school had been, my previous teaching school had been a public school, and I was very glad to come into a place that had a mix of right across the whole social range, and which anyone could come to without having to pay an entrance fee.
I would have liked to have seen direct grant extended. I wouldn't have minded other schools that I worked at going direct grant. It was right, in my view, for Portsmouth Grammar School to go independent. I was a governor at the time the decision was taken, and I had no doubt that that was right. But having said that, one does regret the fact that now people who would have gone to the grammar school are debarred for the simple reason that the fees are beyond the reach of the parents.
In actual fact, we are able now, again, to offer places to boys whose parents couldn't afford our fees if we were fully independent, because as an assisted play school, we can offer places to boys whose parents will pay according to their means.
How many of those boys have you got in the school at the moment?
Only about 30.
And that's out of 800. Will that number grow?
Yes, it will, because we can offer 30 a year. And next year we shall be offering 30 more, and the year after that 30 more again. And so it will gradually build up, I suppose, to be about, very nearly a third of our intake.
So the grammar school is very much a school for the 80s. For one thing, there are girls there now.
The coming of the girls has been an awfully good thing. Boys who before have always been top of their forms suddenly discover they're not, which is jolly good for them. And I think the fact that girls are there, whether they like it or not, does get rid of some of the coarseness which boys would automatically have where they are. I think the coming of girls has been absolutely splendid, and I think the girls have enjoyed it just as much as the boys have.
The girls enjoy it very much. They've come usually to do academic subjects which they couldn't get in other schools, and they settle down very well with the boys. To the boys, they enjoy the social side of it, but within the classroom it's very much the same working attitude.
I regarded it when it was first mooted with, I suppose, deep-rooted suspicion, assuming that this was going to change radically the school that I sort of knew and loved, etc. But now, having lived with it for several years now, I find that it's a very acceptable aspect of the school, and I would say that the presence of girls in the sixth form has improved the sixth form at the grammar school.
One aspect of grammar school life which remains the same no matter what is the combined cadet force. Very senior ex-pupils can remember travelling to Portsdown Hill by tram for manoeuvres in the 1920s.
We were all issued with 5 blanks to fire at one another during this exercise, as they called it. And at the end of the day, before getting on the tram to come back, we were all supposed to hand in any unfired blanks and also to have our rifles looked at to see that there was nothing in them. Well, it so happened that one boy went behind a bush to relieve his feelings and missed this inspection. On the way back, he inadvertently let off a blank which had been in his breech in the tram, and this caused absolute consternation. The driver stopped and refused to go on any further until all rifles were taken away from us and stacked in his little space in the front. The excitement was intense.
Once they have tried it, we find that after the end of their sort of compulsory term in the CCF,
we are sometimes embarrassed by the number of boys who want to stay on.
One of the great things, they get personal self-confidence when they first join and stand at the back of the parade in the yard. And then to see them at the age of 16, 17, 18, in charge as NCOs, and see those same NCOs on the actual service stations, see them looking almost like professionals, I think does demonstrate there's something for the boy to get out of it.
And what about those boys? Everyone's agreed they've changed a lot over the past few years.
Yes, that's certainly a case. Whether to their advantage or not, I'm not quite sure. It sometimes seems to me that small boys have lost their childhood. I'd place the change as happening in about 1965 to 1970. I think most schoolmasters noticed various changes beginning to come over the relationship between masters and boys about then.
There's been a very interesting change while I've been here. For one thing, people mature so much earlier. As a result, when we used to have people who were still that awful phrase teenage, right the way up to the sixth forms, now they're teenage very much earlier, and as a result, they're young men with intelligent outlooks when they leave. I think it's marvellous.
Well, it sounds very much to me as though we've arrived at recorder practice in the lower school, the original school building here in Old Portsmouth at Cambridge Circus. Tony Stokes is the headmaster. Tony, what about the boys themselves? Obviously, it's of great interest to you. What is the value to a boy to be able to go to a school where his prep school is almost under the same roof as his sixth form?
Well, obviously, the thing that immediately comes to mind is the fact that he's with his friends right the way through. And the sort of people you share your school life with are very important to you. And many friendships are made at school, which when they have started at 8 go right the way through.
There must be one or two that stick in your mind. The little terror who makes good, for example.
Yes, there's one does stick in my mind over that, and it was when I first started here, because I came very much as a student teacher for 1 year before my permanent arrival in 1950. And this little boy, who was a red-headed terror, he was tough as old boots. And after several warnings, I finally told him that he would transgress once more at his peril, which he did. So I was left with no alternative. We had to apply the slipper where it was most needed. As he returned to his desk, a none too pleasant lad in the form put up his hand and said, "Oh, sir, Pendy is grinning." At which Pendy turned round and very fiercely looked at me and said, "I'm not, you know. That hurt."
And it's those comic incidents that mean so much to all current and ex-members of the school, both master and pupil alike. Donald Lindsay has memories from the master's point of view, and Frank Sorrell from the pupils.
No, we always held these prize givings in the King's Theatre at Southsea, which place was lent very kindly. And on the final occasion, unfortunately, we coincided with an ice show. The ice to be kept frozen was kept frozen as a result of a machine that made an absolute hell of a noise, and that had to be switched off, with the result that as the proceedings went on, so the ice melted. And with governors and staff on the stage, to the enormous delight of boys and parents, gradually the water rose, not quite over ankles, but we left absolutely frozen to the waist and extremely wet.
I would have thought that one of the problems of going to a day school was getting in and out. Now, you were what was called in those days a train boy. You used to come in from Havant. What do you recall of those days?
I'm ashamed of what we did do, actually. We were a band of 12 boys in one enclosed compartment. Must have been sheer hell. And I can remember one occasion a boy produced some sulphur, which he dipped on the floor of the compartment. And you can imagine 12 boys almost as suffocating from the fumes of burning sulphur. We were hanging our heads out of the window, and as we passed through Bedhampton, I can remember somebody saw it, and the guard eventually halted the train. Eventually, we did get, of course, back to school, and it was reported. as a result of which only one boy, got corporal punishment.
Of course, the days of corporal punishment have long gone, and while I'd like to pass on stories of academic prowess, sporting ability, more amusing incidents and things like that, the last thoughts in this programme must be on future prospects for the grammar school. Here's the headmaster, David Richards.
We do view the future with a good deal of confidence, justified, I think, by the demand for places, which is greater now than it was last year, and last year it was greater than it was the year before that. I feel that we still have an important contribution to make to the world of education generally, and clearly there are a large number of people in the area who think so too, otherwise they wouldn't enter their boys for us.
One very obvious question, which I haven't asked you and really should, is in what way then does it benefit somebody to come to an independent grammar school like this one, as opposed to going for the comprehensive education scheme?
That's a particularly difficult question to answer, I think. Because you can never try both systems in the case of any one boy or girl. But if there are parents who, at the end of a school career, can look back on it and say, well, we found that worthwhile because our boys were happy in that school and they seem to have fulfilled their potential, then I, for my part, will be satisfied with the work we've done.
In Victory Report tonight, we've been celebrating Portsmouth Grammar School's 250th anniversary. Unidentified voices belong to Peter Jameson, Jasper Noel, Frank Sorrell, Jim Brown, Roger Wilkins, Peter Barclay, Christine Dixon, John Hunt, Roger Harris, and Donald Lindsay. Good night.
Radio Victory!
It's 8 o'clock, this is Alan King. British Caledonians say they're ready to take over Laker Airways' license to fly from London to Los Angeles, a move which could threaten Sir Freddie Laker's plans to get back in the air. Sir Freddie is meeting civil aviation authorities.
But
Yeah.